Volume.
Well, I can't really tell you. They seem like something wise. Steam engine, the air pumps, you know, I don't know, probably, they're long gone, 4 years gone. But when the passenger train pulled in the station, you know, they shut down camp. Like that. And I couldn't figure out for life, you know, I kept it on my mind. I said, I'm going to find out what, somebody told us they'd be out of breath. And come find out air pumps. Look what air pump pumping up there.
This is a story of the rebirth of the Belfast and Moosehead Lake Railroad, a short line railroad connecting the coastal town of Belfast, Maine, to the Maine Central at Burnham Junction, a railroad that carried cargo and passengers to market, to vacation, and to war. At the turn of the century, fish and furs, fertilizer, and felts from the thriving shoe, poultry, and seafood industries traveled the 37 miles of track. Rusticators and their steamer trunks plied the winding rails to summer cottages at Temple Heights and Unity Farm. And soldiers riding these cars departed for 3 different wars. This railroad's rebirth is also connected to Europe, Sweden to be exact, which is fitting for a railroad that once hauled freight and people from around the world. Our story begins with the end of the steam era.
When I got there, they only had one of those, but they had number 16, 17, and 18 when I first went there. And 16 was I don't know if make it, I guess in Baldwin, but it was, only had one set of grates, and it was hard to clean fire on it. And the other 2 had 2 sets of grates, which made it easier. But they got rid of 16 before I went into the roundhouse. And then they had 17, 18, and 19. And they would send them away every once in a while up to Derby to be, every 5 years or so, to be overhauled. And when they come back, they could sit in the roundhouse and you wouldn't even know they were going. There would be no noise, no steam leaks, no water leaks. And you wouldn't even know they had fire at all. But after they'd use them a while, they'd be a leak here, and every once in a while they'd go make a chugging noise, and you'd have to get up every once in a while and put water in the gate. In the 45, I think it was 45, they bought 2 diesels, and they numbered them 50 and 51. And they had 1 steam engine left, 19. The other they'd cut up for junk. I guess for the war effort probably, but they kept this 19 because in case they needed 3rd engine. After they got the 3rd diesel, they cut up 19. They said they had the others. That old 19 was a good old engine, but you leave an engine sitting like that, have to sit outside there long enough, and it'll plug up the screen on the front end with the soot. And then the smoke comes right out the firebox door, right up through the cab, and that would do that a lot. Well, ordinarily you could loosen, when they was in the roundhouse they did that, we'd loosen a couple of bolts, we'd have all the rest of them loosened. When they was in the roundhouse they did that, we'd loosen a couple of bolts, we'd have all the rest of them loosened, but we'd leave a couple of bolts to hold. There was a big door on the front end that swung out, and we'd loosen a couple of bolts and swing that out, and take the wrench and just pound that screen, and that put the blower on a little bit, and that would clean it out, and then you could, it would sit for a long time. But that 19 had a broken hinge on that door, and you couldn't open it, so it dropped right down. And the only way you could clear it, you just go up and, it was on the ash stack, sitting on the ash stack, we'd go up and throw that switch. Then you come back and you open the throttle right open. And she'd go spin the wheels like that. When he did, it would blow that stuff out of there. Well, I did that one night, and I yanked the throttle back just as far as I could, and she went like that, and took right off. And I couldn't get the throttle back in. I got way up to the sardine factory, and I was some worried. Well, after that, I let the damn thing smoke. The diesels, nobody really, they didn't like them as a railroad. I mean, it was convenient and everything, but they didn't sound the same, they didn't smell the same, they didn't have any character. The steam engine did.
Several times in its 130-year history, the railroad skirted bankruptcy by selling the majority of its stock and land to the city. By the late 1980s, they no longer offered a regular passenger service, and many of the industries that utilized the freight line had disappeared. The railroad future was in serious jeopardy, and the Belfast City Council put the railroad on the block.
We got involved with the railroad at first is a pretty dire reason is the fact that we were going to look at the railroad simply for scrap. Well, quite frankly, what happened is that we had to operate the line for several years as part of our contract, and we just simply fell in love with it. One of the first promises, or one of the first hopes we had when we took over the line and decided we were going to operate it, was to take it all the way back to the steam rail. Anyone who's experienced railroading and has heard the chug and chug of the steam engine wants to experience it. And having a steam background, at least a marine steam background, I wanted to get back and see if it was possible to bring a 460 like the last one that was scrapped here in the railroad, and we were able to do that. We found that through reading periodicals and talking to people around the world who knew about steam. And we were very fortunate in being able to find some in pristine condition in Sweden.
In March of 1994, Rod Rodriguez purchased a 460 steam locomotive, number 1149, from the Swedish State Railways. Why did a rail company in the United States, a country that once had locomotives by the tens of thousands crossing its plains and mountains, now have to cross the Atlantic and look to Sweden for its salvation? Well, even if you found a steam locomotive in the United States, more than likely it would be in a park, covered with paint or rust. Chances are any moving parts would have been stolen and replacement parts non-existent. The cost of restoring it would exceed $500,000. Sweden is a country steeped in history and tradition, and Swedes have a penchant for preserving them, whether it's a palace, a canal, or a train. Rather than discard older trains, the Swedes stored them, and there you can buy a fully operational locomotive for less than $100,000. The following June, a group of 8 Americans and 25 Swedes meet their hosts, Morgan Clayson of the Swedish State Railways and Don Shapiro of Encounter Steam in Sacramento, California. Together they run an adoption service for the more than 120 steam locomotives stored throughout Sweden. In Stockholm, they board a private work train and trace the 1149's path from its deep freeze storage near the Arctic Circle to its new home in Unity, Maine. Leaving the station, the group is immediately aware of Sweden's extensive railway system, running parallel to passenger trains, freight trains, and new roadbeds for high-speed X2000s. Late that afternoon, the group stops at the Railway Museum in Yore to pick up the rest of the hunting party and fully assemble their train. It consists of 2 electric locomotives from the early 1940s, an inspection car from the 1950s, sleepers dating from the 1930s to the 1950s, a a lounge car from the 50s, dining and cafe cars from the 30s, a 300 kilowatt generator car, 2 work cars from 1910, and 2 flat cars from the 1940s. All these cars are owned and maintained by 5 different private railroad clubs throughout Sweden, many of whose members are also participants of the locomotive hunt.
In all big huntings we have to make sort of a test shot, and this is the test shot.
Wind is like a birthday. You get a present. This is wrapped with something. In which case it's a testing. It has been here for over 30 years. And now I want the Americans to open it.
That first evening in Hedemora, the group gets their first look at the Swedish steam locomotive. In the mid-1950s, Sweden had more than 300 steam locomotives in service. After a long history of conflict with Russia, a national defense policy dictated storing rather than scrapping these working engines. Because of coal and lumber stockpiles, and because Sweden has no oil, these engines could be used to mobilize the country. In case of emergency, the sheds could be opened and engines made operational within 24 hours. They traveled through the night and waked in Östersund, the last stop for electric rail. Here they switched to a T-43 diesel locomotive in the inland Bonum, or the inland line.
We are now on a train heading north for Arvidsjaur. We have about 630 kilometers to go today. And so far we have made about 60. So 1/10 of today's travel we have made so far. We have a train that weighs about 600 tons. And the engine is a diesel engine we are setting in, and it's pulling the train now in the speed about 40 kilometers.
For those from Maine, it was very familiar looking. Throughout the day, the group is greeted and seen off by bicycle riding station hands. After setting the entrance switches, they pedal to the exit. Do the same. Late afternoon, the hunting party stops in the town of Stuma and switch locomotives once again. From this point on, they are pulled by a 240 E2 steam locomotive. Unfamiliar with steam, it is an introduction to dumping ash cans, airing the compressors, and oiling the journal of the backside. Later that evening, at a nearby lake, they stop and fill the tender's water tank. Soon, there is no separation of day and night. They have arrived in the land of the midnight sun. Early the next morning, the train climbs towards its quarry, a tin shed hiding 10 steam locomotives. In the early 1970s, the Swedes removed 150 locomotives from storage, selling many to railroad clubs, and scrapping and salvaging parts from others. In the 1990s, with the thawing of the Cold War, the Swedish state railways elected to sell the remaining locomotives. It was this decision that brings this group, more than 30 years later, here to Ravensburg. Stored on a siding, the engines are sealed in plastic cocoon. Tubing runs from the boilers to dehumidifiers, and the locomotives are coated in cosmoline or rust preventative.
We took the afterbox cover off and found that the journal brass had tipped out of its locating place.
So now that we've ascertained that, we're just going to straight from the slide off the bearing and lubricate it, spin it, and lubricate it and install it. So what we've done here is put the bearing back in its proper location, and now check the journal pad, and it's fine. So very carefully reinstalling it as I slide the oil tray in, and making sure that the spring pad is seated against the underside of the journal. Yes, it is.
See if there's water in the pan here. And to see if there's any oil left. That's pretty dry. What is this? Pull it out?
Nice. Nice and greasy. It's like a chocolate sauce.
Okay, good for work.
Yes. Here we are. Okay. There we go. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Totally.
The chore for the day is to select 5 engines, remove them from storage, and ready them for the trip back to Avasya.
Karl-Heinz, glaubst du, dass du den Chess uns noch einen dazu fragen kannst, ob ihr die Maschine gleich nicht zurückfahren könnt?
All axles and moving parts must be lubricated, and the driver rods must be removed in order not to score the cylinder, similar to taking a car out of gear before pushing it. And all of this is done by manpower rather than power tools. At times, the train will be moved by barring or using a lever in the wheel. The only break will be for lunch. And since it is July 4th and there are Americans on board, the hamburgers are served garnished with flag.
You can move it. Everything's on the way.
Then it's back to work. Swedes and Americans, trading tools and jokes. As one group packs away driver rods and parts, others finish barring the last locomotive into place. The train is ready, and the short trip back to Avachar begins. In preparation for a boiler inspection, the next day's docket includes filling the tenders and boilers with water, lubricating and testing all gauges and controls, and running a hydrostatic test on the boilers of 3 of the engines.
Gauge glass so we can put some graphite oil on the spindles. These haven't moved in a long time. And if I can get it out, I'll be very happy. Let's see, it's It's standing for a bit, so it's not quarter scale.
Locomotive, we found that we couldn't move the throttle, and there was a little bit of debris in the throttle housing, and we cleaned that out, and then we also found some scale. After taking care of the throttle, we cleaned off the feeding surface between the dome cap and the dome, and the Swedish Railways use a metal-to-metal joint, so what we've done here is put some graphite and grease on the mating surface, and we've also put some on the threads of the bolts.
Sitting in the smoke box of a B-class engine, and it's, aside from being rather well preserved, it's very conventional. The engine is superheated. You can see the superheater elements here. They go into the superheater tubes. Below that you can see the fire tubes. Here's the blast pipe. Here's the blast pipe nozzle. And the chimney up here and the petticoat pipe coming down. This is the blower ring, all very conventional. For an engine, this engine was built in 1916, and for something of as old as that, it's in remarkably good condition.
The boiler inspector arrives, and 2 of the engines are approved. Unfortunately, the third has a cracked boiler tube. An easy repair if a shop and time are available. It will just have to wait. Using wood and rags, they begin to build fires in the 2 approved locomotives. The engines are pushed to the coal pile and loaded. Coal is added to the fire and steam starts to build. While the pressure builds in the boilers, people find last-minute chores to do. Gradually, the pressure is sufficient to allow tests on pumps, turbines, and whistles.
A lubricator that is cycled around to keep a fresh supply of oil going into the pump. And after 30 years or so of storage, well, it just seems to be working perfectly.
After more than 30 years of storage, the locomotive is free to roll once again.
We've been pretty much for 2 nights. But we've been firing this thing for about the last 18 hours. We got steam pressure early this morning, about 6 hours ago, and have been trying out all the appliances one by one and blowing water out of the cylinders. And finally, our last task is to get the air pump to work correctly.
The rest of the day is spent fulfilling a railroad buff's fantasy, racing steam engines up and down the track. One engine is a B-class, a 460 with external drive cylinders. The other, an E2, is a 260 with internal drive cylinders located under the boiler. Sneak attacks and quick getaways ruled the day. At one point, the E2 must break from play in order to pick up freight from a nearby lumber yard. Late in the afternoon, reality sets in, and the group has to pick up its toys and put them away. The locomotives are turned around and the train is once again assembled, this time for the return trip to Stockholm.
Stop.
But not before an evening celebrating the day's success at a Swedish country dance hall. After the dancing ends, the singing begins, continuing until the early morning light and the groups return to the train for the long trip back.
Nej, nu är det. Hur allt ska vara. Du vet allting passar sig. Utom när jag ska förklara hur jag känner mig. Jag vill ha en egen måne. Jag vill ha en egen måne som jag kan åka till. Där jag kan glömma att du lämnat mig.
Normally, the train is pulled by 2 approved steam locomotives. But because the weather is so dry and the fear of fire high, the diesel locomotive does the job. And with the added weight of 5 locomotives from the storage shed in Ravagnar, plus 1 from along the way, it is a hard job. 6 locomotives running the rails is a sight few Americans outside of this trip will ever see.
I'm a lubricator on this train. I lubricate the steam locomotives so they don't get hot in the axles on this trip. My big interest of the railways I had when I was a little boy, and I'm born with it, so I can't help it, but it's a great interest. And I like the steamers most because a steam locomotive is living. You can feel it, you can smell it, you can hear it, you can see it. And that's not like a diesel that you press a button and then it goes. The steamer is a living thing with a soul.
The group heads south, traveling day and night. They stop only to pass other trains and lubricate the journey. The final evening finds them tired but nostalgic. New friends, sharing last bits of music, stories, drink, and time. But mostly just relishing the moments and places experienced by this group of locomotive hunters. Although their journey is at an end, the 1149 is just beginning. Continuing on to Brownsburg, it is re-insulated, overhauled, and given a fresh coat of paint by the local railway club. In Gothenburg, along with 7 coaches and 1 boxcar full of spare parts, it is loaded onto a ship bound No sooner than the locomotive's wheels touch the rails and the press sleeve, and the work begins. Once again, the journals need oiling. The locomotive is connected to the tender, and the train is assembled. It is transported up the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad to Bangor, down the main Central Railroad to Burnham, and finally down the Belfast and Moosehead Lake Railroad to Unity, where a new station awaits. Some of the same hands that removed the 1149 from storage in Sweden now join it in Maine. Here to smooth the transition, they help put the locomotive on the rails and teach the main crew the finer points of this locomotive's operation and maintenance. Once the Swedish train passes its United States Federal Railway Administration inspection, the first order of business is to run the length of the track from Burnham to Belfast. On this run, the Swedish and Maine crew test the train's tolerances and compatibility with the track. For the first time since 1951, when engine 19 was scrapped in this yard, steam returns to Belfast on the Belfast and Moosehead Lake Railroad. Rod Rodriguez has made good on his word to bring it back. It is also the first chance for well-wishers, aficionados, and the just plain curious to get a glimpse at the new engine and the power. Then it's time to stoke the fires and roll back to Unity for a proper welcoming celebration and the christening of both a new station and the 1149. Everyone turns out, folks from bygone days, dancers and dignitaries.
Now my thoughts forever roam to the dear old state home. I'm dreaming of the dear ones left behind. When the silvery moon is shining on the hills of dear old Maine, I'm longing so to see the folks at home, sweet home again. Oh, where is my wandering boy tonight? I hear that sweet refrain.
And as a bottle of champagne breaks across 1149's bumper, the spirit of unity is born. A bridge from the past to the future and from Sweden to Maine.
Like every young man, I got fascinated by trains. And I used to beg my father and mother to bring me to the depot every time they came to the village for groceries. I used to see the train come in on the track that we were standing on, and I never have forgotten those wonderful sights of seeing that steam engine.
Sweet